Good morning. Tell you what, fathers are a mixed bag. You get good stuff from dad. You get good stuff from dad. Sometimes you don't get good stuff from dad. My dad is stubborn. He doesn't wear hearing aids. So he thought that it was because of construction work that he became hard of hearing, being around machinery and stuff like that. And I thought I was pretty safe. And then I hit my mid-40s, and the same thing that happened to him happened to me, although it wasn't about construction. So he passed on I got my mother's hair deal. That's not a great deal. And my father's ears. Now, why do I say that? Because I'm becoming senile, and I left my hearing aids somewhere. So if you try to talk to me afterwards, and I'm going, and if it gets really loud sometimes this morning, because I'm not getting the hearing thing right now, so if I start shouting more than normal, then John, you turn me down. Okay, there you go. Okay. We're talking about path of righteousness, and during this series, we're going to take a walk on this path, and what we find on this path, a couple things. Faith, goodness, knowledge, self-control, perseverance, godliness, kindness, love. And those are the stops on the path of righteousness. And last week we talked about the power to walk on the path. We're going to take these things one at a time. And we look at the power to walk on the path. There's a couple things. There's God's glory. We're going to talk about that this morning. We're going to talk about the glory of God and how that glory has changed. And it's important for us to see that in order to understand who God is and how we are to relate to him. And not only glory promises, and we're going to see that God's promises changed as well. We're going to look at the qualities that are cultivated on the path of righteousness. We're going to end with love, but we're going to begin with faith. And we're going to understand the connection of faith to glory and promises. That's what we'll do. Look what it says. 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 through 5. 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 through 5. There's a sheet in your worship folder. Am I doing okay for volume? I'm not shouting yet, am I? What? Okay. His divine power has given us everything we need for life and godliness through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. Through these he has given us his very great and precious promises, so that through them you may participate in the divine nature and escape the corruption in the world caused by evil desires. For this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness. So what we know, add to your faith goodness, that means that the first stop on the path of righteousness is faith. And we're going to say three things about faith. Faith centers in a person, faith claims the promises, and faith is challenged by problems. Those things. Faith centers in a person. If we try to define faith, try to zero in on what faith is, certainly we begin with saying that faith is belief or trust. That's what faith is. But let's zero in on it a little more carefully. Faith is more than agreeing to an orthodox set of doctrines. So, for instance, when you hear a creed, I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. Faith is more than saying check, 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 check to an orthodox series of doctrines. It has to be more than that. It's more than believing in the existence of a historical figure, which gets a little bit better because faith is very personal, we'll see. Faith is centered in a person. But the kind of faith that is biblical faith isn't just content with believing that somebody existed. For instance, I'm reading a book on Lincoln now. My son Gavin got to me for my birthday. Team of Rivals, which the movie is based on. Interesting book. But so, we believe that Lincoln existed, but that's not the same as having faith in Lincoln. And in the same respect, believing that Jesus existed once, faith is more than believing that he existed at one time, because Lincoln can't do anything for me right now. And faith believes that Jesus can do something for us right now. Not just that he existed, but continues to exist, and that he is responsive. That's what faith means. So, what is faith? Faith is belief that results in trust. I've done this illustration before. I believe that chair exists. But I'm not putting my faith in that chair until I rest my weight on it. Now, biblically, I'm putting my faith in the chair. Faith is not just believing that something exists. It is entrusting my weight to that thing. So it's not enough to believe that God is real and that Jesus is real, that Jesus reflects God. Faith is more than that. It means that I rest the weight of my eternal destiny on him and on what he did, not on what I do. That's what faith is. And again, we're trying to zero this thing in, trying a couple ways to try to put our arms around faith. Let's take a Father's Day analogy. Let's relate faith to parenting. What happens with infants, that they cultivate a mental representation of their parents. And you know that it's not too long before an infant will distinguish mom and dad from everyone else. It's stranger anxiety. And so when the infant is with mom and dad, there's this different thing built upon the relationship of the infant with the mother or father. And when this infant, some more than others, are given to a stranger, there's a different reaction to that. And that's what faith, so the mental representation that is created in that infant's eyes, because here's what happens. The infant, all of us, when we were young, we cry and give signals that something is wrong. And mom and dad, they respond to that, and we take note of that. It's like a brick in a foundation. And then, as you've seen an infant do this, sometimes they'll look up with that look about, they'll look at you and you look back at them and you interact, and then they make noises and you make noises back. And what the infant starts to understand is they're responsive to me. And it's another brick in the foundation. Brick, brick, brick. Pay attention to me, change me, feed me. I change you, I feed you, I pay attention, I respond. Brick, 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 brick. And it creates a mental representation in the mind of the infant. These individuals are responsive to me. And that becomes what we know. That history, the sense of security that the infant has, that mom and dad are going to be here, is the basis for self-esteem, self-control, mastery, and empathy. That infant grows up to be a young boy, a young girl, a man and a woman, and the security of that relationship that was experienced is the basis for that infant's ability to feel good about himself. Because mom and dad, you represent the world to the infant. Your parents know that. You represent the world. And the infant gets the world to come to them, gets the world to feed them. He says, I must be pretty important. It's the basis of self-esteem. Self-control. The infant believes, I don't have to take care of all my needs, so because mom and dad are going to be there. Therefore, I don't need to have everything I want right now. Self-control. They're behind me. I can rely on them so I can play. In fact, the security of a child is directly related to their ability to explore and master things. If an infant believes they're secure, they don't have to watch their back because you're going to watch their back. You know what they can do? Play. They can discover things. Mastery and empathy. They have the ability to believe relationships are good. And you might say, Mike, what's the deal? I think it is an image. I'd like you to, that image of the mental representation of the image of the parent in the mind of the child. That's faith. That's faith. It's belief in the responsiveness of God. You can't see him, but you believe he cares about you. Believe that he'll provide and protect. Faith in God means confidence in God's responsiveness. And this security is at the heart of the development of everything. What we're going to see, remember that pathway? faith, goodness, knowledge, self-control, perseverance, godliness, kindness, love. What's first on the path? What's first on the path? Do you know why? Faith is foundational to the cultivation of everything else. An infant that's secure in the responsiveness of the parent has the ability to be self-controlled. Sometimes we spin that around. We think that once I control myself, then I'll be able to believe God is responsive. That's upside down. I believe that God is responsive. That's the basis of self-control. Do you understand? That's why faith is first. Faith in His glory and His promises is the basis upon which the cultivation of all the other things, it starts here with faith. Faith is foundational. Faith is seminal. Faith is where the road begins. Everything hinges on it. It is how your Christian life begins. It's how it continues. It's how it ends. This is where we're rooted in faith. Why faith is first. A picture is worth 1,000 words. The Bible paints a picture of faith. People came to Moses when they sinned, and God had sent venomous snakes. And the snakes were biting everybody, and they were languishing. Anybody ever been bit by a snake? Anybody ever been bit by a snake? A couple people. Jeez, get away from them. Anyways, what happened? The people were bitten by snakes, and here's what God said. Put the emblem, the representation of a snake on a pole, and everyone who looks at the snake will have life. And that's what ended up happening. I want you to think about that individual. Bitten, hears, all I have to do is look up at this representation God's put. That's faith. Faith is observing. Now, not looking at the snake, not looking at the bite, not looking at the other people who have been bitten. Faith regards God, looks at him, the thing that God posts that help us to know what he's like. That's an image of faith. Why do I say that? Look what it says in 1 John 3. Dear friends, now we are children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known. We know that when he appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. I want you to listen to that. Ultimately, what is it that changes us? Now, it says it in this verse. I'm going to read it again. What changes us? What transforms us? Here's what it says. We know that when he appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. You know what's going to happen when you see God as he is? Bam! You're going to be changed. It's not going to be hard. It's not going to be an excruciating process. Our transformation is directly related to our seeing God as he is. I think that's what it says. And look what it says. Everyone who has this hope in him purifies himself just as he is pure. Transformation is the inevitable byproduct of seeing God. It's challenging to get a clear picture of God. Challenging. Remember the story of the prodigal son? What did it take for him to get a clear picture of his father? Remember the story? He initially thought, well, Dad's really doesn't have my interests in mind, so I'm going to take the money and run. I'm going to force him to kind of give over the inheritance, and I'm going to take it and then go away. And so he did that, and he squandered the money, and he was in a place where he wanted to eat food which the pigs ate from, and he was eating, and he wanted to eat from there, and that's when it dawned on him. Wait a minute. My father treats his hired men much better than this guy that I'm working for. You know what biblically it says? He came to his senses. He saw his father in a way that he hadn't seen his father before. And when he did that, he returned home, and you remember the story, found the father waiting for him. Seeing his father was critical. Question, why didn't he see the father before? In a way, he did. You know what happened, I think? I think he saw the Father through the eyes of his older brother. Remember what his older brother was like? Slaving in the fields. The older brother would never ask God for anything because, as far as he was concerned, his father was a master and he was the slave. And he slaved in the field. That's the word it uses. Slaved in the field. So this younger brother, some of us are oldest children here. Any oldest children? We have a tendency to be perfectionists, responsible. And you know what ends up happening sometimes? The next in line looks at, well, I see what he's up to, and I'm not going to be able to do that. I can't do that. So the next in line sometimes becomes a rebel. And they're going to say, I'm going to get my attention. Any rebels out there? I think that's what ends up happening. This younger brother saw his father through the eyes of the older brother as a slave master. But then he ends up seeing him differently. A couple applications to this. A Father's Day application. Sometimes being a good father means letting a child go and awaiting their return. Kind of a painful vigil can be, to let the child go. And when they make choices that aren't the kind of choices that you would like to see your child make. Allowing them to make the choice, but it's a delicate act, delicate balancing act, is it? In terms of influence and understanding, at some point, you don't have the ability to influence, and sometimes people have to make mistakes. Some of you understand this, and you have had the joy of seeing a child return. That's a nice thing. Some of you are still doing what the father did, waiting at the end of the road, waiting for the child to return. Sometimes being a good father, though, means letting your child make their choice and then waiting for them to return on their own. Second application for all of us, you don't need to be a dad. God is like that father. And it doesn't matter where you are. He waits for you. And he doesn't wait impatiently, but he waits for you to come to him. That's what he's like. And when Jesus tells this story, he tells it to people who are under the influence of somebody who's acting a lot like the older brother. They're looking down on them, saying God would never have anything to do with anybody like that. And so they were criticizing Jesus for hanging around with people who were moral boogerheads. And Jesus said, let me tell you a story. And he tells the story of the prodigal son. Faith centers in a person, and sometimes it's difficult for us to know what that person's like. That's why Jesus tells that story. The person whose faith I want to zero you in on is that father waiting at the end of the path for his child to return. That's who he is. And sometimes you have to screen out the perceptions of those who don't understand him that way, like the perceptions of the older brother. Second thing, faith claims the promises. Faith claims the promises. I guess the question I'd say, which promises? God seems to change in the Bible. God seems to change. In fact, see that word glory? There are two different words for glory in two different languages. The Old Testament was written in Hebrew. The New Testament was written in Greek. I'm going to tell you the difference. Now, both words are translated glory. You come to the Old Testament, the word for glory is kabod, and it's translated glory. You'd see it open up, Old Testament, glory. New Testament, you'll find glory, but that wasn't written in Hebrew, it was written in Greek. That word is doxa. And they're both translated in the same word in English. But Old Testament, kabod, glory, that means weight. Something solid, something heavy. And that's the feeling of glory in the Old Testament. It's solid, but it's heavy. Glory is a reflection of God's regard, and God's regard felt heavy. But then God's glory changes. Glory changes. The New Testament word for glory is doxa. That's opinion, valuation. The Old Testament glory is more like evaluation. New Testament glory is more like valuation. What it is, it's the opinion that you have of someone. That's the word for doxa. It comes from the word to think. to think. Doxology. Doxology is doxa, about God, and logos, words about God. And what it says then here, doxa is more God's valuation of you. It doesn't feel as heavy. In fact, Jesus says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. God's glory changes. His promises change too. Look what it says in Hebrews 8. Hebrews 8. But the ministry Jesus has received is as superior to theirs, and it's talking about the high priests and the priests of Judaism, ancient Judaism, as the covenant of which he is mediator is superior to the old one, and it is founded on better promises. For if there had been nothing wrong with that first covenant, no place would have been sought for another. But God found fault with the people. I'm going to call that into question. God found fault with the people. Bad translation. And we'll talk about that. It's literally them. And said, the time is coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant. I will put my laws in their minds and write them on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will a man teach his neighbor or a man his brother, saying, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. For I will forgive their wickedness and will remember their sins no more. It says God found fault with the people, literally them. The focus of the passage is not on people, it's on promises. Look what it says. The ministry Jesus had received is as superior to theirs as the covenant of which he is mediator is superior to the old one and is found on better promises. So what is it talking about? Promises. It's talking about promises. And then it says, if there had been nothing wrong with that first covenant, no place would have been sought for another, but God found fault with literally them. What did God find fault with? Not the people, the promises. The promises change. Old Testament promises are supplanted by New Testament promises. That's the focus of the passage. That's why it says, so God made a new covenant. A new covenant. And the promises of the new covenant are different than the promises of the old covenant. You say, okay, Mike, I've heard all this before. What does this have to do with anything? It has everything to do with everything. Our faith needs to focus on glory and promises. Which promises? Which ones? New covenant promises. I'm going to put my law in your mind and write it on your heart. I'm going to be your God and you're going to be my child. And I'm going to be Helios to your transgressions. That's literally what it means. Helios means gracious, favorable, benevolent, merciful. That's what it means. So here's what it says in the new covenant. I will be gracious, benevolent, merciful, and cheerful when you sin. I talked about my dad. Every dad has a dad face. I talked about my dad face, but my dad's is a multimedia dad experience. It has to do with audible, something you see, and with noise. So here it is. And so again, I can't always do it. My dad's a pro. I can't make it work. It involves you have to kind of make this little thing, and you just have to go, you got to make the right, it's got to be like that. And you've got to look away. So it has to do with all these things. And this is the way it looks. So that's it. And so that's yeah. Ooh, you don't want to get the dad face. How's he looking at you? What's your dad face? What's his dad face? What'd you do yesterday? That thing you're ashamed of. What's his face when he looks at that? I'm disappointed in you. Thought you were better than that. Some of you see the faces being disgusted. I'm done. I'm done waiting for you. I'm done waiting for you. All these things I've given you, my son died for you, and you're still doing what you're doing. You've been a Christian for how long, and you haven't beaten that thing yet? What's the dad face? You know what it says? I will be Helios to your trans. Listen to me. Listen to me. That's what it says. Here's God's face before you do that thing. And here's God's face after you do that thing. Doesn't change. Cheerful, gracious, benevolent, merciful. What would happen if you believed that? Now, some of you are saying, if I believe that, all hell would break loose. No, it wouldn't. You know what happens if you believe that? You start to believe in his responsiveness. You know what happens when you believe in his responsiveness? Do you remember those four things that come? Self-esteem. You'd feel better about yourself and your relationship to him. Self-control. That's the kicker. That's the kicker. Seeing that you're not reactive to me. It doesn't decrease self-control. It increases it. You say, how? It does. Self-esteem, self-control, mastery. Seeing how he really sees you frees you up to be able to learn some things. Empathy. You end up feeling more for people. Isn't that interesting? Where does it begin with? Faith. Faith is at the heart of it, folks. Seeing God for how he is. And his glory changes, and his promises change. That's the argument of the passage. Faith centers in a person. Faith claims the promises, and faith is challenged by problems. But it says, last passage, Jesus tells a story. Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them that she would always pray and not give up. He said, in a certain town there was a judge who neither feared God nor cared about men. And there was a widow in that town who kept coming to him with the plea, grant me justice against my adversary. For some time he refused, but finally he said to himself, even though I don't fear God or care about men, yet because this widow keeps on bothering me, I will see that she gets justice so that she won't eventually wear me out with her coming. And the Lord said, listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones, who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will see that they get justice, and quickly. Look at this question. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? What is that? When the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? What's the point? Here's the point. The point is, keep on praying, resist the urge to give up. Why does he need to urge us not to give up? Because we keep on knocking, we don't get an answer. And what he says, Jesus says, because that's the way it is. Because when you knock and pray, you don't always get the answer. And then what do you start to think if you don't get the answer? He doesn't care. Or either he doesn't care or he's unaware. And you know what ends up happening? Forget it. Forget it. You know what Jesus says? Because of the nature of prayer and faith, you're not going to get the answers. You get some answers, but not as many as you need to be satisfied. Not as many answers to prayer as you need to avoid being frustrated. How many of you have felt frustrated by your inability to pray and get what you want out of prayer? Get it up there. I see just about, and I see some of you, okay, I'm not going to do what you asked me to do anyway. Some of you are naturally rebellious. But I saw most. And you know what the deal with that is? And that's the reason why he says, because all of us are going to feel that at some point. What's the use? I'm going to stop praying for a job. I'm going to stop praying because I've been knocking for how long? And he never answers. And what Jesus said, I wonder how many people when I get back are going to be knocking. How many people are going to say, God schmod, forget it. He's not responsive. He doesn't care, or he's unaware, so forget him. And Jesus says, I wonder how many people are going to give in to that. We can understand that, can't we? Because of the lack of response. You know what faith is? Confidence in God's responsiveness in spite of apparent unresponsiveness. That's what faith is. confidence in God's responsiveness in spite of apparent unresponsiveness. God makes promises to you. I'm going to put my law in your mind. I'm going to be your God. I will forgive your wickedness and remember your sin no more. And there's eternal welfare. I care about you. God, do this, and he doesn't do it. Now there's a struggle. You say these things, but I'm not seeing it. Not seeing it. And that's where the struggle comes. You know what? You know what ends up happening at this point? What's the first step on the road to the path of righteousness? Faith. Here's my question. Does God care about you? How do you know? Well, because of all the answers to prayer. Really? You're going to be able to base your picture of God on the foundation of all the prayers he's answered? Is that going to work? Is that going to work? Nope. You know what faith means? Faith today, I hear of it, it's often attributed to if you have as much faith, you can get whatever you want. That's not what this parable says. Faith does not allow you to get what you want. Faith allows you not to get all that you want and keep on knocking. You know what this parable says? You keep on talking to him because he does care. How do you know he cares? He who did not spare his own son, but delivered him up for you. Listen to me. He who did not spare his own son, but delivered him up for you, how will he not also, along with Jesus, freely give you all things? Is God holding out on you? Is he holding out on you because he doesn't care? The argument is from the greater to the lesser. If he didn't hold out with his son, is he going to hold out with promotions? I don't know why you didn't get the promotion. I don't know why the person didn't get well. I don't know why that thing happened. But it's not because you don't have a father who cares about you and who tells you, keep on knocking and look at his glory and goodness. You know what prayer is? Prayer isn't overcoming God's reluctance. It's laying hold of his willingness. That's decent. Prayer is not overcoming God's reluctance. It's laying hold of his willingness. But we have to lay hold of his willingness by listening to what he says. We won't always be able to gauge his willingness by what we see. Does that make sense? Faith doesn't allow us to get what we want. Faith cannot be sustained by focusing on answers to prayer. We have a couple things. You see that 10 commitments from God to you? We did an initial thing. This is on our website, sfhopechurch.com. That top one, if you went to the website and clicked on that gold box, what you would get are daily for 40 days. The initial thing we did 4 years ago, I forget what it was, 40 days with the 10 commitments. So once a day, you would get an article short that would talk about one of the commitments. Now, there's 40 days, 10 commitments. Each commitment is dealt with 4 times. So if you clicked on that, tomorrow you'd get God Sees Me, and it's a short article, and so they progress. That's 40 days with the 10 commitments. That's if you click that box. If you click the box underneath it, those are weekly email messages. The top one is daily for 40 days, one time. The second box down, that's weekly. And so now we're honing in, zeroing in on 200 of these things. So once a week, write an article on one of the commitments. Why would we do that? Because it focuses us on his promises. That's where faith has to focus. Do you understand? That's where faith has to focus. On His glory, His promises, what He says to us. That sustains us. And there's another thing here. There's a blog. And if you look back on, let's go back one. News and Views. What that is, those are articles. I change those once a week as well. And all those, the books, on Galatians, Romans, Hebrews, and 2 Corinthians, those existed as blog entries. And then we put them all together. So that's where those books come from. Now what we're doing, the blogs focus on the 5 steps. The 5 steps. That's another thing to do to keep our focus on the kind of things that enable our faith to be sustained. So you remember the 5 steps. Be real. Be honest with God. Be still. Breathe freely. Exhale your concerns and inhale His commitments. Wait perseveringly and respond gently. Now, right now we're in the middle of once per week. Each week I deal with one of those 5 steps, and I'm going to keep on doing that. Why do we do that? And why do I show this to you? This is our way of trying to create a way that we can keep our focus on. Back one more. His glory and promises. You know what faith is? And I'm going to have the worship team come up. Faith, we talked about 3 things about faith this morning. We said faith centers in a person, claims the promises, and is challenged by problems. And faith is that which allows us to continue to hold on to God, to believe in His responsiveness, even when apparently He doesn't do all the things we want. But as we look at His glory and promises, it helps us to not only hold on to the reality of our life here, but hold on to the reality of His care as well. Let me pray for us. Father, when we talk to you, you encourage us always to do that, to keep on talking to you. You tell us that as we do so, as we present our requests, your peace, which passes all understanding, guards our hearts and minds and enables us to hold on in faith to you. Prayer is powerful and important, but you also tell us that it will not always get us what we want. We're going to have to exercise faith. We're going to have to wait. You would encourage us to continue to talk to you because the fact is you do care. And that thing that we asked you about, it wasn't because you were unaware of us. And it's not because you don't care about us. That's not why we didn't get that thing. It's not because why that person, what happened to him. There are things that happen, but it doesn't mean that you're not loving, you're not good. You want us to cling to you. Would you help us to do that? Would you help us to focus our faith on things about you, things you tell us about yourself, that give us comfort in the midst of storms, that enable us to wait in the midst of things that we'd rather not go through. Thank you that you are with us. You've entered this chaos, and you walk with us in the midst of chaos. You don't always deliver us from it. Be with us. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, dads, have a great meal.